The judicial system is vast and complex, and even people who are dealing with it on a daily basis often run into issues they simply can't solve by themselves. So imagine how judges must have felt when the accused weren't even human. History knows many such cases, most of them of course in medieval Europe, but there were such incidents even as recently as the 1980s. And I'm not talking about putting down aggressive dogs or innocent squirrels, as today it's done without extensive legal process. No, I'm talking about full-blown trials with a prosecutor, defender and a judge. Interested? Then sit back, relax and let's have a cup of absurdity. As I mentioned before, the records of first such cases have survived since medieval times. The phenomenon took place primarily in European lands, and the first of the known trials took place in the 9th century, but the vast majority of known accounts date from the 15th to 17th century, so it went well into Renaissance. Back then, when an animal committed a crime, like property destruction or manslaughter, the law was quite clear about the owner's fault, by which I mean the law didn't care, because the owner could deny the ownership of the animal and not take part in the trial at all, and of course avoid any punishment. I guess the loss of the animal was a punishment in itself, but most of the time it was a more preferable outcome, unless the offense was a minor one or the animal was of the more valuable variety. And yes, the value mattered quite a lot. After all, a prized horse is worth more than some stable hand, right? And so if a costly animal caused some mischief, or a little murder, the families were usually paid off and the cases were not pursued by the office. Of course, as it was in the feudal system, when valuable animals were concerned, the owner of the animal would usually be the one to have to sit as a judge, so I guess they at least cared about conflict of interest. The animals were judged almost exactly like humans, and were subject to both secular and church judgments. The fact is that such trials were not present in Protestant societies, in large numbers at least, but occurred in the Catholic nations often enough to not be a sensation. The accused animals, like their human counterparts, were kept in jail and fed while waiting for their trial. But unlike humans, they were judged as non-Catholic. That much is obvious, since a horse going into a church sounds like a beginning of a joke. But what was the real joke there was the discovery process. The animals were of course allowed to make their case and were interrogated. But of course for technical reasons, everyone defaulted to the old saying that silence is gold. So when the animal refused to answer, it was considered as an affirmative response. Just a quick reminder for you to give this video a like and hit subscribe for more absurdity. The list of historical animal trials has over 200 positions and is still thought to be rather incomplete, so we're only going to have a look at a few of them to give you a general feel about how they went on. The first one we're going to have a look at is the case of a pig from Valais from 1387. The pigs, presumably on all fours, accused of killing and eating a small child. In this fair and just proceeding, she was convicted and sentenced to death. Her execution wasn't witnessed only by humans, because animals from all over the area were brought there to behold her punishment, in order, of course, to discourage criminal behavior in them. The pig was brought out wearing human clothes, then she was dragged around town square, her snout was cut off, and then she was hanged upside down to bleed out. Her corpse was then burned and the ashes scattered. Another pig which was accused of the same crime, and if you're surprised, remember that in those times, livestock often lived with humans inside houses, and pigs, well, pigs will eat almost anything. Anyway, she was tried together with her piglets, which took part in the meal. The defense, however, argued that minors cannot be tried for crimes they committed at the instigation of adults. And in the end, only the pig was executed. Did I say executed? Well, first she was tortured. And apparently so intensively that she admitted to the crime, which, knowing the commitment of medieval torturers, I'm almost inclined to believe. And after that she was of course hanged. Those civil trials against individual animals usually did not involve the premise of demonic possession. An execution of a male chicken in 1474 in Basel was somewhat of an exception. The bird, you see, has allegedly laid an egg, and it was quickly connected to demonic influence. Sources disagree as to whether the people thought that the egg would become a basilisk or a cockatrice, but since both options were equally pleasurable, the bird was burned at the stake, probably together with the egg. So, were the animals always executed as the result of conviction? Strangely not. For example, in 1499, An ox that killed a child was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. I don't imagine he noticed the difference. At the end of the 17th century, a goat in Russia was accused and convicted of a similar crime, and she was exiled to Siberia. And the Sardinian penal code provided specific penalties for donkeys caught causing damage on someone else's property. For the first time, one ear would be cut off, and in the event of repeat offenses, the donkey would lose the other ear. There is also a single historical case of an animal taking part in the trial by combat. And what's more, the animal did win that fight. This story is sometimes considered to be a legend, but it survived in a letter penned by Julius Caesar. And not Augustus, the one you probably thought about, as surprisingly there were no animal trials in the Roman Empire, but Julius Caesar Scaliger. According to the letter, in 14th century, a courtier of King Charles V, a guy called Aubry de Montdidier, was murdered in the forest by one Robert Macaire. The only witness to the murder was the knight's dog, Brutus, which later attacked the perpetrator back at the castle, but was stopped and captured. The king, who was fond of the murdered knight, knew that he was the owner of this dog and was wondering about his absence, so he connected the dots. He ordered that Macaire, armed with a stick, and the dog should fight a divine duel, which took place on the Isle de Notre Dame and which the dog won quite quickly, after which Macaire confessed to his crime and was, of course, hanged. So those were the civil cases where the animals were judged, but I did mention the church trials, right? You see, the church usually dabbled in some more unorthodox trials because the defendants were often a group, or a swarm, or mischief. Mischief is a collective noun for a group of rats. The more you know. Yeah, the church went after really difficult cases there. They passed judgment on locusts, birds, termites, rats, and other living beings which in large numbers begin to stir some trouble, like famine or plague. Similar to the civil cases, the groups of animals had their own defenders, who were trying to prove their innocence. Though to be honest, they had to do some mental gymnastics to explain why their clients don't talk or don't attend the court. The first documented ecclesiastical trial took place in 824 in the Aosta Valley in Italy, ending with the excommunication of moles. However, it was the locusts that were one of the most common targets for prosecution. When a swarm of them was treating the fields like their own free canteen, the people were unsurprisingly quite discontent. So they usually sued. The defense argued that it's natural and the Bible gives all animals a right to feed and procreate. The prosecution usually slammed this argument with the fact that the same Bible a few verses later gives humans power and authority over these animals. The arguments kept clashing, the trial dragged on, and the locusts kept eating. On one such occasion, the people of the town that was infested by the insects separated some meadows and proposed to the locusts' defender for them to move there. You know, instead of eating through their fields. The defender inspected the place, then outright rejected the idea, saying that the meadow was a less attractive accommodation and had less food. This particular trial went on for 2 years, and we don't even know how it ended because the manuscript stops being readable just before the good part. I won't say it was the locusts, maybe salty due to the lost case, but who knows. In a remote region of France, a colony of bark beetles was once ordered by a church judge to stop eating through the church furniture and other possessions and go away under the pain of curse, malediction, and excommunication. The time to move out was 7 days. So did the bark beetles comply with the order and moved out? Well, maybe they did, because we have an account of the same defense attorney representing rats in a later case. And I don't think they would give the animals a good lawyer in those cases twice. Anyway, in this other case, he stated that the rats couldn't attend the proceedings because they were scared of local cats. Generally, the church judgments on animals were warranted by a belief that plagues and misfortune comes directly from Satan. So the church threw curses at any random bird or insect that looked at a local pastor the wrong way. Of course, the animals were crushed and heavily moved by such acts, and they repented immediately. Yeah, no, that was a joke. They didn't care at all. Apart from criminal and church cases, there were also, well, those cases. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Animal lovers. and not the kind that goes all melted butter over a cute puppy. In practice, the act of extreme animal fondness was one of the worst crimes you could commit in medieval and Renaissance Catholic Europe. It warranted the death penalty every time and for both of the lovers. And most usually it was carried out by burning at the stake. Sometimes, however, the judge ruled that the animal was a victim of forced approach, and then only the human perpetrator would taste the fire. First at the stake, and then, as they believed, down under. The idea of putting insects or livestock on trial may appear completely absurd by modern standards, yet in the medieval era, shaped by religious teachings and folk traditions, it was viewed as entirely logical. Central to this belief was the theological view that animals, given their presence in biblical narratives such as Noah's Ark, were thought to have at least a semblance of souls and a measure of moral responsibility. Consequently, they could be deemed accountable for their actions, much like people. Additionally, church law did not differentiate between the legal standing of humans and animals. This ambiguity, paired with pervasive ideas of witchcraft, demons inhabiting animal bodies, and folktales that assigned human qualities to creatures, created fertile ground for animal trials to flourish in medieval communities. Historians believe that these events were to some extent a result of widespread conviction about the universality of law. Peter Dinselbacher, historian from the University of Vienna, proposed a list of factors that allowed for the animal trials to occur and continue. For example, a general state of social unrest, the fact that the civilization was in the middle of the process of establishing court procedure, and belief in the subordination of all creatures to spiritual authority. The reasons might have been more mundane too. An animal that has caused the death of a human was killed because of the threat that having killed once, it might do so again. The animal trials went on all the way to the 20th century, as for example, in 1926, a German shepherd was put on trial in Kentucky. He was accused of attempted murder of a small child. He was found guilty and executed. As bad as it sounds, I wonder if they ordered him to sit. The last known case of an animal being accused was in Lima, Peru. In the 1980s, 7 parrots were accused of defamation. Sounds weird? Only until you realize that their owner, after buying them, taught them the most vile, terrible curses and insults she knew. Everyone walking past them was swarmed with insults, and the case was brought to court. The parrots demonstrated their vocabulary in the courtroom, and in the end, the owner got fined. And the parrots? Thankfully, their lives were spared, and they ended up in a zoo for resocialization. These trials, where pigs, insects and other creatures stood accused in court, reflect a worldview where the natural and the divine were deeply entangled, and justice was a universal principle, binding all living beings. By prosecuting animals, medieval communities sought not only to punish transgressions, but to reaffirm a moral order governed by divine authority, blurring the lines between human and beast. But even though such situations were quite prominent back then, we seem to have somewhat forgotten about them. Well, if nothing else, they prove that history is never short of wild stories to keep us questioning. And so we reached the end of this video. Huge thank you to everyone for watching. Remember to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, which I guess you did if you're watching it till this moment. Also, if you think I deserve a sub, then I'd be happy to have you on board. Let me know in the comments what do you think. Should animals be tried for their offenses like humans are? And what modern day practices might future generations find utterly absurd? So, thank you all again for watching, stay safe and absurd, and see you in the next video.